World War II is back in the mainstream. Thompson submachine guns, beach landings, and Nazi bad guys once again provide a backdrop to what seems like the industry's next cyclical trend. For how long, who knows? Battlefield 1 traveled back to World War I, manipulating the setting to match its chaotic gameplay, and taking an interesting approach to single player, telling multiple mini-stories from across the war that differed in tone and content. Battlefield 1's war stories were not brilliant nor groundbreaking in their totality, but were a welcome change and style that I enjoyed. Battlefield 1 single player was definitely better than Call of Duty World War II, which struggled with identity and coherence and added little to no originality, amounting to a hodgepodge recreation of scenes from famous war movies and shows copied and pasted into a video game. In what direction Battlefield 5 takes World War II is yet to be seen, but after a 10-year trend from modern military shooters that went even so far as being science fiction, being old is now all of a sudden cool again. The saturation of World War II games that permeated the early 2000s when Call of Duty, Medal of Honor, and Battlefield alternated releases at an annual pace may have started with, of all things, a movie director. This guy, Steven Spielberg. In this movie, after cementing Saving Private Ryan as one of the greatest war films ever made, Spielberg, himself fascinated by video games, wanted to take World War II and put it in a context appropriate for younger audiences. That context eventually became Medal of Honor, a game that kicked off a trend in gaming that would lead to the modern military craze of the late 2000s. Spielberg's later project, Band of Brothers, a 10-part HBO miniseries, only added fuel to the fire. As Medal of Honor sided more toward the arcadey side of first-person shooters, 2003's Call of Duty swooped in and, taking a cue from Saving Private Ryan and Band of Brothers, attempted a historically grounded, pseudo-realistic look at World War II. "In the war that changed the world, no one fought alone," is what the original Call of Duty said on the back of its box, and this was an important core concept. While military simulators like Rainbow Six and Operation Flashpoint represented the industry's early attempts at portraying realistic war, a World War II version of that, even in the saturated market that was, really hadn't been tried. The original Call of Duty definitely set itself apart by its emphasis on the larger picture of World War II, but still found itself as a more casual shooter, and never matched the tone, characterization, grit, and commitment to historical realism that Spielberg delivered in Band of Brothers or Saving Private Ryan. It wasn't until 2005, when a 6-year-old Gearbox Interactive would not only develop the team's first ever original IP, but also a semi-late entry into the World War II FPS market. That IP was Brothers in Arms: Road to Hill 30. To this day, Road to Hill 30 and its two console follow-ups, Earned in Blood, released 7 months after Hill 30, and Hell's Highway, released in 2008, represent what I would say is the closest video games have ever gotten to matching the drama, terror, brutality, and camaraderie shown in Spielberg's masterpiece portrayals of World War II. Brothers in Arms casts you as a member of the 502nd Parachute Infantry Regiment of the 101st Airborne, a portion of the men who dropped behind enemy lines on D-Day, the Allied invasion of German-occupied France. Beginning during D-Day, Road to Hill 30 and Earned in Blood take place in the weeks that follow, putting you through levels that were designed and modeled after actual battles and firefights. Brothers in Arms is a series that, for the most part, takes itself pretty seriously. Its realism and authenticity is threefold: a squad-based tactical combat system that used suppression and flanking to defeat enemies, levels that were designed and modeled after real-life firefights and first-hand accounts of the invasion, and a story that was sobering and blunt. Along with the help of military advisor and retired U.S. Army Colonel John Antal, Gearbox's efforts in recreating the days and battlefields following D-Day is impressive in of itself. The team scouted and photographed buildings and landscapes and built them into the game, working them into the gameplay. The setting, dialogue, and equipment all reflect that level of detail and realism Gearbox aimed for, and a large portion of the game is dedicated to education. There's an extras page in both games that includes all kinds of supplementary information, from on-site photos to slideshows about World War II history, narrated by Antal. One specific thing I've always found fascinating was a level in Road to Hill 30 titled Objective XYZ, which is a recreation of an actual battle for a small village. While going through the mission, you clear a house and burst into a dining room with German soldiers sitting around a table, their guard down and seemingly unaware of the fighting taking place outside. It doesn't take much to gun down the soldiers, and the scene instantly feels odd and out of place for a game all about suppression and flanking. Well, as it turns out, the moment is inspired by an after-action report of the battle for XYZ, detailing that, while clearing a house, Sergeant Harrison Summers of the 101st Airborne burst into a dining room with 15 soldiers sitting at a table who seemed not to care about the fighting outside, Summers killing them before they were able to react. There's more than a few of these moments that are inspired by real first-hand accounts. They provide a morbid sense of curiosity, one that's so incredibly personal. You're not just taking part in a battle, but actually taking part in one man's experiences during that battle. And that's how Road to Hill 30 and Earned in Blood frame their stories. They're character-driven, told through the eyes of each game's main character, Matt Baker in Road to Hill 30 and Joseph Hartsock in Earned in Blood. Baker Baker narrates his story. He's brooding and somber. The death of his men and weight of his command severely haunt and strain him.
I've spent 8 days here. 8 days commanding a squad I wasn't ready to lead. 8 days watching my men, my family, be killed. 8 days wishing it would stop. How can a man stay focused on life when all he sees is death? I can't get it out of my head that sending Allen and Garnett with Leggett got them killed. If they'd just been with me. Fuck! If they'd just been with me! Maybe they'd still be alive! Maybe I could have saved them! Maybe.
Hartsock also narrates in Earned Blood, but the production values are higher, as Hartsock is actually being interviewed about his experiences rather than monologuing directly to the player. These cinematics in Earned Blood are actually pretty good and well edited and shot too. Hartsock's story, while occasionally intersecting with Baker's, fills the gaps Hill 30 leaves open, and even picks up a bit where Hill 30 leaves off. It's Baker and Hartsock's friendship that serves as the centerpiece to Hill 30 and Earned Blood's story. You see how the two friends reconcile the death of fellow soldiers, how they handle the stress of war, and there's even a certain point of contention between the two at times. The best and most appreciated part of Brothers in Arms' writing and story is that it isn't just a rehash of famous scenes from war movies. It takes the ambience and tone of the media that inspired it and creates something new. Gearbox did a phenomenal job injecting personality and heart into the story and characters, and while some of the writing may come across as cheesy or maybe even a tad sophomoric, it's sincere, endearing, and appropriate. Those moments of budding camaraderie and the pure dread of seeing a fallen comrade are impossible to imagine living through, let alone creating, and I think Gearbox overall did so successfully and tastefully. By 2005, tactical shooters had become a genre with a little more clout. Franchises like Ghost Recon, Rainbow Six, SWAT, and SOCOM all had a decent amount of mainstream success. Brothers in Arms, while definitely being more tactical than not, doesn't go as far as being a simulator. There's standard HUD and a cursor, along with options to turn certain elements like the cursor off. But tough recoil and weapon sway, limited health that only replenishes in between missions, and solid enemy AI make combat slow, aiming difficult, and decisions more meaningful. The basis for Brothers in Arms' combat system is suppression. A red circle floats above enemy heads that turns gray as they take fire. Once suppressed, enemies become less aggressive. They don't return fire or react to you as quickly, and suppressed enemies give you opportunities to move between cover and flank. As soon as firefights begin, returning fire isn't always the first thing you'll consider. Rather than solely focusing on the enemy, your focus splits between the enemy and your surroundings, cover, good firing positions for your squad, and possible routes to flank by. Moving in between cover, shouting orders at your squad, and trying to give yourself covering fire is, to this day, among the most visceral and intense combat systems I've ever played in a game. It's a system that relies on squad-based gameplay, meaning firefights in Brothers in Arms are not the big flashy battles you've seen in other games. Instead, the fights are mainly between small infantry squads amounting to handfuls of enemies. Your decisions here are important. Squad mates don't have a lot of health, and when and if a squad mate dies, they don't respawn or heal unless you restart the entire mission. However, if you do fail enough times, Brothers in Arms will ask you if you want your squad mates to respawn with you at the previous checkpoint, because war is unfair, but video games should be. As a kid, this message hit me pretty hard, a game breaking the fourth wall not for a comedic reason, but to openly tell you that you're lucky you're only playing a video game. So making good decisions becomes important for two reasons. Firstly, losing troops makes suppressing and assaulting enemies harder. The more soldiers you lose, the more difficult the combat becomes. Secondly, your squad mates aren't just generic characters, they aren't just random faces with names. You'll hear and see them interact with one another, and some of them you really come to get to know. So putting your squad into compromised positions really stresses you out, and seeing one of them gunned down mere minutes after he cracked a joke in a cutscene is terrible, and it just makes you feel like shit. As you progress, combat becomes increasingly more complex and almost morphs into a puzzle game. Base of fire squads used to suppress enemies and assault squads used to flank them utilize different weapons, and using them correctly actually matters. Suppressing with your assault squad and flanking with your base of fire squad is possible, but inefficient. Various weapons, while also differing in accuracy and fire rate, have different levels of suppression as well. And Brothers in Arms starts you with an array of weapons. You'll have the opportunity to decide whether you want to join the assault squad or help suppress enemies while you give orders. Tanks and gun emplacements add even more folds to the combat. Tanks obviously make easy work of enemy infantry, but finding a hidden anti-tank gun or another tank quickly changes the dynamics of a firefight. Now, it must be said that while Brothers in Arms combat is great, it can get bogged down in crack occasionally. There are scenarios where you have to avoid tanks or flank machine gun emplacements, and while exciting, these sequences sort of pause that immersion Brothers in Arms usually nails. Shooting an enemy tank to lure it to you doesn't feel realistic, and some levels, specifically Entered in Blood, do a poor job of communicating how and where to go to progress, piercing great moments of immersion and realism where the gameplay falls flat on its face. The AI, both enemy and friendly, is good, even by today's standards. Enemies react to your movements and allies find cover and are normally pretty easy to control. All things considered, the combat and AI are important elements Gearbox skillfully executed. I can't say it's aged well in every area, and I don't know if I would recommend Brothers in Arms to everyone today, but during its time, it was among the very best mechanical and narrative depictions of World War II in video games, and some of that is still true today. I still remember the first time I played Road to Hill 30. Its opening sequence left me stunned, scared even. It's not a bombastic opening, neither glamorous or glorified. It's incredibly dark. You watch a friendly soldier completely snap, and you're unsure if your character even survived. And when I think about modern attempts to portray grounded, realistic combat, I have a tough time coming up with games that were and are as well-rounded as Brothers in Arms. Yes, you have realistic shooters like Insurgency, Red Orchestra, and Onward that do fantastic jobs creating realistic multiplayer, but they're multiplayer. Battlefield Bad Company told a fun, over-the-top story about a band of silly miscreants in war, and Modern Warfare certainly had well-written characters and a serious story, but they were shooters. They didn't have that pair of gritty realism and personality that Brothers in Arms has in both the story and gameplay. So as the industry moves forward back to the past, I wonder if there will be any attempts to match what Brothers in Arms achieved. Will the market be saturated enough or popular enough to warrant a historically grounded, gritty World War II game again? Does the market status even matter? Those are tough questions with uncertain answers. But with the development technology available today, and the vast improvement we've seen even with things like cinematography and writing in video games, the industry's new trend may provide an opportunity for a game like Brothers in Arms to flourish.